Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our Oxford MBA Southern Africa webinar. I hope that you're all keeping safe and well wherever you're dialing in from today. Before we make a proper start, I just want to make sure that you can all hear us okay. If I can ask some people to type yes into the question box, just so that we know that we are actually reaching you guys and that we're not speaking to ourselves, that would be really helpful. Perfect, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I can see lots of yeses coming through there. So that's a great start. Thank you all very much. Let me begin then by introducing myself properly. My name is Hannah Griffiths. I'm one of the recruitment and admissions managers for the Oxford MBA. And I'm delighted that as part of my role, Southern Africa is one of the parts of the world that I get to look after. I'm also really glad to be joined this afternoon by my colleague Tammy Brophy, who is our Africa Initiative Manager, and also by a panel of our Oxford MBA alumni from across Southern Africa, and we'll introduce you to them shortly. Over the course of the webinar this afternoon, we're hoping to provide you with an overview of our Africa Initiative and of our commitment to the continent. I'll speak briefly about the Oxford MBA curriculum and give you an idea of what your year in Oxford would be like from an academic perspective. I'll also talk a little bit about our cohort and try to give you a better idea of who you would find yourself in the cohort with if you were to join us on the Oxford MBA. We'll touch a little bit on the application process as we move through the webinar this afternoon, but that won't be the primary focus of what we talk about today. If you do have some very specific questions about the application process, there's lots of useful information available on our website. We'd also be really happy to have individual conversations with you post-webinar, so do please feel free to reach out to our team if you do have any questions about any of today's content, but in particular about the application process after the webinar. We'll be very happy to help. But the main focus of the webinar and the majority of our time will be spent talking to our alumni panel and asking them to share some of their experiences of the Oxford MBA with you all. So to start, I'm going to hand over to Tammy, who's going to begin by sharing some information about our Africa initiative with you all. Over to you, Tammy.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you all again for joining. I hope that you and your families are well. You know, in times like this, it really does emphasize the need for strong leaders, both within government and business. And we believe that the Oxford MBA plays a significant role in helping students develop as responsible leaders. So as Hannah mentioned, I'm going to chat a little bit more around our Africa initiative. So on our first slide, I'll run through a little bit more in terms of what is the Africa Initiative. So as you know, Africa is becoming an increasingly important region on the global stage. The World Bank has predicted that by 2035, the number of Africans of working age is predicted to be larger than the combined working populations in all other regions. So that is really significant. Therefore, with Africa being projected to be the world's second largest, fastest growing economy, there becomes an increased need for leaders who can navigate the challenges as well as access the opportunities that exist on the continent. So to give you a bit of background as to the story and how the Africa Initiative actually was established, back in 2014, a pledge was made by our Dean, Professor Peter Tufano, at the World Economic Forum on Africa in Abuja to have at least 10% of our MBA class coming from Africa. To put that number into perspective, most international MBA programs have on average only 2% of their class coming from Africa. Therefore, we were really making a substantial commitment to achieving that 10%. A lot of people ask us why 10%? Why do we have this focus on Africa? And for us as a community, we believe that by having a significant number of African students, we were able to provide direct insight into a range of very exciting and emerging economies in Africa that are very influential, extremely influential, in fact, in the global marketplace. But also it was to educate our non-Africans about what the opportunities are on the continent. So we've had a lot of our students that had never been to Africa before, that had never worked in Africa or had an interest, were now being influenced by our African students on looking at Africa as an opportunity for post-MBA careers, or investing in Africa, or entrepreneurship, which our alumni can chat a little bit more about. So following that pledge, we became very purposeful in our recruitment to ensure that we could increase accessibility to a very broad range of African prospects. We host, maybe I should say we used to host a number of school-led information events in a variety of different countries. We're now doing more online events such as this, but we also created dedicated scholarships for our students from Africa. So over 65% on average of our African students receive a scholarship through the business school. So in summary, we were very proud to actually have had more than 10% of the class coming from Africa for the last 4 years. In the current class, we have 13% coming from Africa, representing 12 different African nationalities. So everything from Morocco and Egypt all the way down to South Africa. And 54% of those African students are women as well. So we've been very purposeful in ensuring diversity within the countries represented, as well as gender representation. Part of our Africa initiative was to also include African-focused content. My alumni can chat a little bit more around some of the electives that we hosted, but we created a number of different Africa-focused electives, both in Africa and based in Oxford. We have dedicated case studies, events, speakers, as well as creating new networks and opportunities during and post-MBA to strengthen alumni and current students' networks in Africa. So on the next slide, I'll just briefly chat around some of the activities that are included in the Africa focus. As I mentioned, we have dedicated African scholarships, which I'll run through. We have our annual Oxford Africa Business Forum. So one of our alumni can again chat a little bit more around that forum, but it's an annual event. It's been running for more than 11 years now. And we focus on different topics each year that we feel are either very topical or relevant to the continent. We bring thought leaders from Africa to come spend a few days in Oxford, engage with our audience, engage with our students and alumni. And it's a really great way, I think, for both students to network, create different sort of career opportunities, but again, to share on what is happening in Africa with an entire Oxford and UK community. We have the Oxford Africa Business Alliance, which I chair along with Africa students. So you would assume that an alliance is very similar to an Africa Student Club. However, we've taken it to a slightly advanced level where it's a joint initiative, it's a joint alliance between both students, school representatives, the university, to really be able to come together, collaborate on different ideas, topics, events, content to drive the Africa initiative forward. We have an international elective every year where about 60 students travel out. It's in South Africa at the moment, but we're looking to move it to different countries where we focus on what are the growth prospects and opportunities in Africa. And again, great way for both African students that even if you have a lot of experience, it's a really great way to be able to get a Pan-African view on doing business in Africa, as well as those students that have had very limited experience in Africa. We run a number of things around student treks, a way for our students to both engage from a corporate perspective as well as cultural elements, to encourage students to travel to different parts of the continent. We have alumni chapters, whereby those are countries where we have a large concentration of alumni, but then even in some of our smaller sort of populated countries with alumni, we still have different opportunities to engage with faculty and the school as well. So that sort of summarizes some of the Africa focus activities. I think it would be better for you to hear from my alumni as they talk around all these different topics. But I think just to close, I'll just finalize with the Africa scholarships. On the next slide, you will see some of our African scholarships or scholarships available to individuals from Africa. This is not the complete list of scholarships. I would encourage you to go onto our website where we have a very long list of scholarships, as well as university scholarships that you can look through. What I will say is a few things about scholarships. One, don't let funding be the barrier to applying in the first place. You cannot find out if you have received a scholarship until you have been successful to receive an offer on the program. So you need to trust in that process. But a large proportion of these scholarships are awarded automatically, but some do have individual essays or interviews that you would need to do. The scholarships range from partial scholarships to full scholarships. Some include living expenses as well, and some have specific focuses on different countries, gender, sector of interests. But what I think you should take from this picture is that for us as a school, we have made a very strong commitment to ensuring that funding is not a barrier. And something to emphasize that there's the Africa Dean Scholarship, and the Dean and his wife personally fund that scholarship every year as part of his commitment to driving this in the Africa Initiative forward. So look at the different options available to you. Look at the funding schemes that might be through different loan providers such as Prodigy Finance. Explore opportunities around being company sponsored, even if it's part sponsored. And the last point to mention is to look at Chevening. It's a really great scholarship scheme that's delivered by the UK. We are not directly affiliated with it, but it's a great network, and so I'd encourage you to go look at Chevening if funding is something that you would like to consider. So I'll hand over to Hannah now, and she can run through a little bit more about the program before we hand over to alumni. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tammy. So before we move on to the main part of today's webinar and to our wonderful panel, I just want to briefly touch on what your year in Oxford would look like and give you a bit more of a feel for what the cohort that you would be joining might look like too. So if we can move on to the next slide. This should give you a picture of what you might expect to encounter in your 12 months on programme with us in Oxford. So that's an important place to start. So the Oxford MBA is a one-year programme, and by 1 year we do mean a full 12 months that you would be joining us in Oxford. And you can see from the slide that the academic year is then split into 4 semesters. It's probably important to highlight that the programme obviously evolves and changes annually, and so what you see here on the slide might not be exactly what you would find if you were to join the programme in the coming years, but will hopefully give you a bit of a feel for the different things that you can anticipate covering. So you'll see that in the first semester you can anticipate covering essentially what are the fundamentals of business through our core courses, which are highlighted in red here on the slide. And then as you move into the Hilary and Trinity terms, you really have the opportunity to then begin to tailor your learning experience by choosing a number of different elective options. So there's a huge breadth of choice available when it comes to the elective options. And again, there's lots of useful information about this available on our website. But just to give you a little bit of a taste, you can choose from things like business history to corporate valuation to an elective on global strategy, among many, many others. You'll also see that there is the option to participate in some international electives as part of that offer. I know Tammy touched on that a little bit, and I'm sure that's something that our panel will speak about in the next few minutes as well. There's lots of opportunities to work collaboratively on the Oxford MBA and with other members of the class, and you'll see that represented here on the slide, in particular through our 2 projects, so our entrepreneurship project and our Go-To project. And then in the summer semester, you'll see that despite it being a 1-year programme, it still includes everything that you would anticipate finding on a 2-year MBA, so it does provide you with the opportunity for internships or also to participate in a strategic consultancy project if that's something that might fit with your goals. Our academic programme is complemented by our co-curricular offer, some of which is listed on the slide here, and also by our talent development programme, which is run by our Career Development Centre. And again, that co-curricular offer is something that we'll touch on when we're speaking to our alumni panel in the next few minutes. On the next slide, you'll hopefully get a little bit more of a sense of who you can expect to be joining if you were to join us on the Oxford MBA. So you'll notice from the slides that we look at the class profile in terms of ranges rather than averages here. And I hope that's really helpful for any of you who've dialed in this afternoon and who are trying to work out, you know, and assess your own suitability and eligibility for the programme. Also really important to highlight here how diverse our class is. Again, I'm sure that's something that we'll touch on with our panel, but we're very proud to have over 64 different nationalities represented in our current cohort, and also very proud of the percentage of women who we currently have in our class on the Oxford MBA, though obviously this is something that very much remains a work in progress for us and a percentage that we would certainly like to increase across the coming years. So we're now going to move on to the primary focus of today's session, which is our alumni panel. So on the next slide, you'll see that we're joined today by 4 of our alumni from across Southern Africa this afternoon. We're delighted to have them with us, and we'll invite them now to turn on their webcams, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that you will soon be able to see all of them and that we won't have any tech issues. Perfect, thank you, Nabilah. Perfect. I think we're almost there, just missing Clive. Great. So what we might do while we're waiting for Clive's camera to come on is we'll ask all of you guys if you would just like to introduce yourselves to everyone who's dialed in today. So if you just want to give a brief introduction, say who you are, where you are, and a little bit about the role that you're in currently, that would be a great place to start. Nabilah, can we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here today. My name is Nabilah Subadar. I was part of the 2016-17 MBA class. I'm based in Johannesburg, and I'm currently at Deloitte, where I run the Responsible Business and Public Policy program for our firm as a senior manager.
Thank you, Nabilah. Niel, over to you. Oh, we can't quite hear you, Niel. I think you might be muted.
There we go. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, guys. My name is Niel Nodia. I'm also based in Johannesburg. I was a part of the most recent graduating class last year. I'm currently working for the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant. Almost excited for you guys.
Thank you very much, Niel. Barati, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barati and I was part of the 2017-18 MBA class. Currently based in Johannesburg, and I'm a vice president at a private equity firm, which has offices in Joburg as well as Accra in Ghana. And we invest all along the agricultural or agribusiness food value chain. So all the way from primary, including secondary as well as tertiary, we invest across sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah.
Thank you, Barati. And thankfully, Clive, I think we have you. Do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
No, sure. No, thank you very much. So I'm Clive Msipa. I'm based in Harare, Zimbabwe. I was in the 2006-7 class. So I run a finance business based here in Zimbabwe, Harare. I've been doing this for the past 11 years. So I spent my first 2 years post Oxford working for a private equity firm, then came back home to found this finance business. So basically we provide finance to SMEs. And our business model is we get most of our funding from capital markets. So it's largely also funding capital markets, and then we obviously on-lend these funds to SMEs.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you all so much once again for joining us today. We're really grateful for you giving up your time to share your experiences with everyone who's dialed in today. So you've all touched there a little bit on you are at in your career at the moment, and so I want to make that the focus of our conversation to start with. So Nabilah, coming to you first. I know that post-MBA you returned to your employer, but since then you've obviously progressed within the organisation. Could you share a little bit more with the audience about this progression and say a little bit about how the MBA enabled you to do this successfully?
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, that's correct. I prior to doing the MBA, I was at Deloitte. So I'm a CASA, and I worked predominantly within the corporate governance space after I completed my articles at Deloitte. And for the year, I had essentially taken a year of unpaid leave to come across to do the MBA. And the one thing that I did was I kept in touch with the sort of the director, the partner that I worked with at Deloitte, and the idea of being able to share what I was learning and staying in contact to understand what was going on that was relevant in the South African landscape as well. What then happened is after I had done the MBA, I had come into this new role as into regulatory and public policy and responsible business, and we sort of formed this new unit within Deloitte Africa, which was very exciting. And that was directly as a result of the experience and the perspectives that I had gained whilst I was on the MBA. What I found was that, and I think for me the big takeaway was the idea of being engaged and being connected with people within your ecosystem, because it sort of was the meeting of an opportunity, and the firm was looking at public policy as a space and regulation public policy, and my interest in terms of what I was doing on the MBA was very much around responsible business, looking at the relationship between business and society, and those two things came together very well. There were some courses that placed me really, really well to be able to tackle this role when I came back. In particular, the class in business strategy and politics, which was a fascinating course that looked at how you would look at the non-market environment of an organization, of a business. So it goes beyond just your customers and clients and competitors and suppliers, but looks at the activity that happens in the wider space around with governments and NGOs and activists, and really understanding the bigger picture. So for me, that was immensely beneficial in terms of the role that I came into. The other sort of course, as well as I would say an integrative course, was responsible business. And I'm sure a lot of you who've read up about the Oxford MBA know that the focus on the role of business in society and having that harmonious link is something that the business school does really, really well, and has world-leading expertise, in terms of the professors and the thinking in that respect. And for me, that really opened my eyes in understanding different perspectives and being exposed to, I guess, thought leadership in this area and practical implementation through some of the companies that came to the business school to speak to us and the Responsible Business Forum. And in my current role, like now, what I'm currently looking at the Responsible Business Program for our firm across Africa. I'm drawing a lot from the learnings that I had there, the contacts that I've made there in keeping abreast of some of the developments there. So yeah, absolutely. I think there was for me a very direct link between what I learned and how I was able to then roll it out here.
Great, thank you, Nabilah. And Niel, there'll be lots of people dialed in as well who'll be interested in your career journey, because post-MBA you made the transition from engineering into consulting. So I wanted to ask you if you knew kind of in advance of the MBA if that was what you wanted to do, and again kind of how the MBA helped to prepare you to make that transition.
Yeah, no, actually, I think I went into the MBA with quite an open mind as to what I wanted to do afterwards. I think anything that was really clear was that I was looking to pivot out of technical engineering, where there's quite a narrow focus. Try and broaden your perspective and try and see things with a bit more of a bigger picture lens. So yeah, I went there with no expectation, and just actually pretty much just open-minded and just try to see what sort of opportunities were out there, and I think just combining the things that you do pick up and you do learn at the MBA with a pivot into a management consulting role was actually it was incredible. Really, it really did exactly what I sort of envisioned. Really pulled me out of that a technical role, looking at nitty-gritty, fine details, looking at a particular piece of equipment, to looking at an entire business, looking at from a strategic point of view, where should the business go, where are they coming from. It was just I think it really just hit all the boxes, ticked all the boxes, and yeah, something I'm really grateful for.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Barati, you had started to make a pivot into impact investing prior to coming on to the MBA, and wanted to ask a bit more about your interest in impact investing and how that informed your decision to pursue an MBA, and maybe a little bit about what resources were available to you during the MBA that allowed you to develop your skills and interest in that area.
Yeah, sure. So as you correctly say, I was pivoting or changing my industry, because the bulk of my career was about 8 years worth actually was in fast-moving consumer goods. And although it was still finance, I was doing more strategic finance roles, and towards the end, I got involved in infrastructure investments in Ethiopia and as well as Kenya, where I was living at the time. And so I knew that a pivot would be a bit difficult in terms of post-MBA securing a role immediately in private equity and, as you say, impact investing, because for me, what I wanted to do was use my finance skills to help in economic development on the continent, and by ripple effect, then improve social and environmental impact as well. And so the best advice I actually received on reflection was from the head of finance careers at Saïd Business School, John Madwick, I remember, when I was telling him about my interest in pivoting and using the MBA for that. And because it's a one-year program, what he said to me is, if I could, it would be best to start my pivot prior to the MBA, because that would put me in a position, a much stronger position post-MBA, when I'm interviewing for private equity jobs, where I can leverage the experience I had in FMCG, definitely leverage that experience, but also show that I've already started and embarking on this investment journey. And that was probably one of the best pieces of advice I could have received. So as you said, I started my pivoting journey, I'd say a year before my MBA. I joined a friend of mine who was starting up an impact investment fund, which was a great experience. And then just prior to the MBA, I was actually at the CDC Group, which is the UK's development finance institution. I was part of the Africa office. And so you can say that the MBA was almost the final stretch of my pivoting journey. And in terms of why Oxford in particular is, there's actually a saying that Professor Dean Tofano likes to say, and there's another alumni friend of ours who always likes to remind us of it, is, if you want to do the MBA just to get a pay increase or just to get a promotion, then by all means, you can go to any business school you want to go to. But if you want to change the world, come to Oxford. And I know that sounds very altruistic and it sounds quite pie in the sky, but you'd be so surprised by how many of us actually want to either change the world or want to change the continents or the communities in which we live in. And that for me really spoke to what my passion was behind the type of technical skills that I've gained over the years. And so that for me was the first thing to resonate in terms of why Oxford. Second to that was the Africa Initiative. I have quite a passion in terms of developing the African continent. And so there are a lot of business schools that can talk about, yes, we want diversity, but I found that at Oxford it's beyond tokenism, and it's much more real and genuine, and that was quite important to me. In addition to that, there was a Center for Entrepreneurship, and so the main goal of the School Center for Entrepreneurship, and I'm sure many people on the call have probably looked it up, it's on the website, is to maximize social entrepreneurship globally. And so I thought, oh, that's amazing. Then I'll be in a position to use my finance skills to help some of the most innovative social entrepreneurs in the world, and help them to commercialize as well as become more sustainable from a profitability perspective. And in doing so, help them have greater impact. And so those are some of the reasons why I was really, really pulled to Oxford. And I think particularly from a co-curricular curriculum, I was really drawn to the Impact Bootcamp. I think it's called the Impact Lab now, because it was run by Patton, who's actually Bonnie Patton. Sorry, she's actually one of our alumni, and not just in Africa but globally. and she runs that program. And I thought it would be a brilliant opportunity, together with my classmates, like-minded individuals, to be in that type of an environment. Also the finance lab, which was also a co-curricular. So when I say co-curricular, you've got your normal curriculum from 8 to 5, and then from 5 to 9, finance lab. And what that was for me, and why it was important, particularly because I was pivoting, was the fact that I was able to hone in on my investment skills as well as my technical financial modeling skills. Because what I didn't want going into interviews or trying to secure a job post-MBA, especially because I'm pivoting, was my technical skills to come into question. So I wanted to make sure that I've bedded that down, and the finance lab was very instrumental, and I actually use some of the tools now in my job, and it was quite instrumental in securing a role in private equity post-MBA. So I'd say that those definitely were the resources that I leveraged on.
Thank you so much, Barati, and thank you for sharing that Dean Tofano's message there when you were speaking. I feel like that's really a key message that we want to get across to everybody today, and it's so central to what the Oxford MBA is all about. So thank you very much for sharing that. Clive, over to you. So you also represent another type of career group, in that you're the founding CEO of Unto Capital Limited, as you mentioned, and I'm sure there's lots of people dialed in who also aspire in the future to maybe launch their own venture. What skills do you feel the MBA provided you with that have enabled you to found and successfully build your own company?
Thank you for that. Well, first and foremost, I would say the MBA program, the Oxford MBA program, has a very strong emphasis on first and foremost, just entrepreneurship in general. But there are obviously, a lot more, specific disciplines that the MBA also takes you through. I do recall in Hillary, for example, in our time there, we had an entrepreneurial project, which was a key part of the course. So whilst this obviously did give you a very good grounding in terms of the frameworks, you would require, in first and foremost, conceiving of, ideas, formulating them, and obviously, putting them in a format that investors can take a look at. The entrepreneurial project really, in a very short space of time, was really able to give one a good sense of what a journey in actually starting a business, raising finance, would look like. And I do recall at the end of that entrepreneurial project, the different teams obviously had to pitch to a team of investors. So I would say the Oxford MBA does certainly have a very strong emphasis on entrepreneurship in general. But at a very individual level, I would also say the Oxford MBA, certainly for me, gave me an opportunity to interact with both faculty, guest speakers, and also my fellow colleagues on the program, with very wide experiences. There were quite a few on the course who had started businesses before the course, and some that went on to found businesses, post the course. I think networking is certainly a key skill that I did gain at Oxford. Certainly, post the MBA, my focus really was to get into private equity, and after having spent some time in private equity, is when I then moved back onto the continent. But certainly, networking, I think, is a key skill that I developed during my time on the course. Certainly, the challenge of securing the role that you do desire. It's a one-year course, so unlike the two-year MBAs, you don't have the luxury of going on an internship and then securing a role before you actually complete your MBA. So you're pressed for time, and you have to be extremely creative and resourceful as you look for your next role. So certainly networking is a key skill, I think, that the Oxford MBA will impart. I think lastly, I would say my confidence level as an individual certainly went up a number of notches during the time I actually spent on the MBA. I do recall, in my time there, I think there was Silicon Valley comes to Oxford, and then obviously, with the various, speakers that did come through to address us at the MBA. You certainly do get a sense that all these world achievers and all these world beaters are people at the end of the day, and you only learn this by interacting, with speakers of this caliber. I do recall, during our time there, we interacted with Reid Hoffman, of the LinkedIn fame, and he was part of the Silicon Valley comes to Oxford conference, and really by interacting with people of this caliber in very close quarters, I think it does wonders for your confidence.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Clive. And Niel, coming back to you, I did also want to ask you a little bit about entrepreneurship as well, because I know in addition to your career in consulting, you have also now ventured into entrepreneurship as well and have co-founded a craft gin distillery. And so wanted to ask you as well if your time at Saïd sparked an interest in entrepreneurship, and again, what resources were available to you to support that growing interest in entrepreneurship when you were on the program.
Yeah, I think like most engineers, you always have some side hustle going on. I think mechanical engineers will work on cars or something like that. And myself as a chemical engineer, I used to brew beer and make gin in my garage. So this really just started as a hobby with two other friends. And I think the important thing here really is that the exposure that you get in the MBA is so broad, and it's really up to what you take. But what is quite interesting to hear is that the classmates across the years have all spoken about the strong theme of entrepreneurship, coming through, and all the different exposures that you get at the school. So I think that being said, going into the MBA, I definitely didn't have a focus on entrepreneurship. It was something that I didn't really take seriously at the time, and I kind of regret that now. Or I wouldn't really say regret, but I just say I am disappointed that I didn't think of it more as a career opportunity, going into the MBA, and as a result of it, it really took me quite a while, to for lack of a better word, take it seriously. And I think with all these exposures, like Clive said, networking opportunities, classmates that have successfully started businesses, talks by experts. We had the Oxford Foundry there, the entrepreneurship project. It really made me see that something as small as a garage gin distillery could pivot into something that can go far. And I think there's a whole lot of success stories in South Africa with distilleries like Inverroche being bought over for big money, and coming back to Johannesburg, has it changed my perspective on the business? 100%. We now moved into a new premises. We have a lady that works for us. So we have a full-time staff member. I mean, the coronavirus alcohol ban wasn't too good for us, but we're looking to launch our first label into bottle stores, as soon as we can get our supply chain up and running again. So yeah, is the business big enough for me to work there full time? Probably not, and probably not for a while. But has the experience and the exposure that I got at Oxford positively, shifted my mindset towards the business? Absolutely. It's really forced me to focus and forced me to take it quite a lot more seriously, and really given me a bit of a toolkit to just play around. So not just playing around with making the product, but also with trying to make a success of the business overall, which is quite exciting.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for sharing those insights. I know because you've all had quite different journeys post-MBA, I hope that we've touched on a lot of the different routes and the different ideas that everyone who's dialed in today might have. So thank you all very much. I'm sure those insights were really helpful for people who have joined us this afternoon. I want to focus a little bit now on some of the other experiences that you had in Oxford, so some of the co-curricular options. And Barati, you mentioned some of those already. I know that during your Oxford MBA experience, you were the co-chair of the Africa OBN, which is now the Africa Alliance, and wondered if you could share some of your highlights from leading the OBN and speak a little bit about your involvement with the Africa Forum for everyone who's listening.
Sure. There were a lot of highlights, I must say. We had an incredible time with what's now called the Africa Alliance. If I were to think for a couple, one that stands out definitely would be the collaboration we did with the Oxford Africa Society. So the Oxford Africa Society is a society outside of the business school, which is another incredible benefit of coming to Saïd or going to Saïd Business School, is that yes, you've got your incredible classmates in terms of the business school, but you also have the exposure and the opportunity to network with the greater university, which is absolutely amazing, and some really intelligent people. And so we collaborated with the Oxford Africa Society, and we brought the current president of Ghana, the Honorable President Nana Akufo-Addo. He came to Saïd Business School, and he's actually an alumni of Oxford, which is incredible. And so he gave us a talk there, and we had a private dinner with him as well, which was that was a very big highlight. Another one was we hosted the former finance minister of Nigeria when she was launching her book. I think she's actually now on President Cyril Ramaphosa's advisory council, if I'm not mistaken, for economic recovery post-COVID. That was definitely a highlight. We also started a series where we brought entrepreneurs who were disrupting industries or the communities in which they were in, or countries that they were in, and they came into the business school and gave talks on a quarterly basis, just telling us about their journeys, and we could ask questions. And that was just not open to the business school, but we also opened it to the wider Oxford community, which was really great. And then, as you mentioned, the Africa Business Forum, definitely right up there in terms of my highlights, being involved in the Africa Alliance. I actually co-chaired the forum with Tammy, and we did that along with an incredible committee of my fellow classmates. And the topic that we had for the year was redefining the African consumer. And it was actually a follow-on, if I remember correctly, from the previous year, where they spoke about the African narrative and making sure that the African narrative is told by Africans. I think most people on this call will be aware of the saying that until the lion learns to write, the story will forever glorify the hunter. And so that was the previous year. And so in redefining the African consumer, we were continuing that conversation, and that let us define the opportunity related to the African consumer. Let's deconstruct the narrative that it is an overrated opportunity, that the Africa Rising story per se was overrated and it's not as big as it actually is on the ground, and that doing business in Africa is difficult. And I think most importantly, coming out of that, what we focused on was not to be a forum for forum's sake. I think many of us go to conferences where you go and at the end of the day, you're like, what in the world did I take out from that? And so what we were very deliberate about doing was making sure that there was a really robust conversation around how do we actually action these opportunities that we've identified? How do we commercialize these opportunities? And that was really incredible. We had executives from the leading businesses across the continent, covering all regions, if I remember correctly, as well as also engaging with the African diaspora in the United Kingdom. So that was definitely right up there in terms of the highlights and being involved with the Africa Alliance.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much Barati. One of the things that a couple of you have touched on already this afternoon is the networking opportunities that you had as part of the MBA. And I wanted to ask you, Nabilah, about being elected to the Oxford Saïd Alumni Advisory Council. I know that you were elected to that in June 2018. Could you tell those who are dialed in a little bit more about the AAC and the benefits of being part of such a global network?
Absolutely. So I think before I jump into the AAC, I think for me, the one thing that I've realized, having finished my MBA, is that the 1 year that you're in Oxford is just the start, and there's this entire journey that begins once you leave in terms of your alumni experience. So the Alumni Advisory Council is essentially a formalized group of alumni representatives that work very closely with the Oxford Saïd Alumni Relations Office to advance issues of alumni concern and to really make the alumni experience more fruitful and really enjoyable. I think for me, this just shows in terms of how much of a focus the business school places on the alumni as a stakeholder to be able to interact with the alumni on an ongoing basis in this forum and on that platform. So the group is essentially about 20 of us who represent different degree programs. So it's not just the MBA, there's also the MFEs, the executive education representatives, and people coming from different cohorts from across the board. So it's quite an exciting spread of individuals and bringing different perspectives, in terms of what the needs of the alumni are from the different years, from the different groups, etc. And I think as the years go on, and it's now, I think, been 2 years, two and a half years since I've completed my MBA, you begin to realize how important that network is. There's obviously there's a very strong bond that you'll create with the cohort that you complete your degree with. So in this case, your MBA degree, and you'll stay connected with that cohort. I mean, I've attended all sorts of amazing events as a result of friends and the family that you really make from your classmates on the MBA, like weddings and just being in contact with each other. But there's also a very, very rich professional network that you tap into, not just from your class, but going beyond that. Particularly in Johannesburg. So for those of you who are looking at coming back to South Africa after the MBA or coming back to your home country, there are Oxford Business Alumni Networks chapters that are stationed across various cities all over the world. We have a Johannesburg chapter as well, which is fantastic in trying to touch base with individuals who you might not have met because you were in Oxford at different times, but you share this common bond of having gone through that experience together, and you're able to really, whether it's a question of networking for the purposes of business or just in terms of widening your the scope of individuals that you're interacting with, it's fantastic. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is particularly with the Alumni Advisory Council, is that we have the opportunity to engage with the school on a variety of things. We actually have a meeting tomorrow, which I'm looking forward to. So, for example, earlier this year, the Saïd Business School was looking at refreshing its purpose and really, taking a deep look from the perspective of, what is the direction that the school is going into, and what does this mean in terms of how the purpose is articulated? And they engaged with the Alumni Advisory Council quite a bit in terms of getting our perspectives and our thinking of, what are our thoughts, on that. And I think for me, it's really important that you have this connection with the school beyond just once you graduate and you say "do freedom," which you'll all become very familiar with at the end of your journeys. But that there's this entire journey that starts afterwards, which is absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Clive, coming back to you, one of the things you touched on already was having the opportunity to collaborate with your cohort. And obviously the cohort on the Oxford MBA is extremely diverse, so with over 90% of the class coming from outside the UK. How do you feel the diversity within the class added to your experience on the Oxford MBA?
No, thanks, Megan. I would say in my particular year, we had a very strong contingent from North America, and we also had pretty fair representation from Asia as well, in India in particular. I think those were, at the time, the two biggest sources of a lot of the candidates on the program. But having said that, it was a fairly diverse class, and I would say, from an individual level, I definitely benefited from interacting with colleagues, from different countries, to the extent of understanding the countries that they were from, and also just understanding, the different ways of actually doing business in different parts of the world. So as part of the program, certainly towards the end in Hillary, we also did have a specific class where you were able to then elect, to take a course in doing business in emerging markets or doing business in other countries, outside your home country. And I do specifically remember one specific case study that we did, which was doing business in China, and at the time, China and still continues to be a pretty interesting story within the emerging markets. And obviously, at the time in 2006 and 2007, China was very much on the way up. And I do recall going through a lot of these case studies, trying to understand the case studies. And we did have a classmate who had actually worked in that particular company that was the focus of the case study. And they obviously brought to bear different perspectives than the ones that you would ordinarily have gone just by going through the case study. So certainly benefited from the diversity from a nationality point of view, diversity from experience point of view. And I think, as Niel had said, earlier on, as one was thinking through their next steps, it did help to really sound out the different classmates on the experiences and future prospective careers. So diversity from a nationality point of view, from a background point of view, and also culturally as well. I do recall we had a pretty strong Indian contingent in our year group, and just celebrating the different cultural festivals certainly did add to the experience within the course. So very diverse class, benefited from the different nationalities, understanding the different cultures, and more so for me as I then went on to actually start a business post MBA. The business that I actually run does have a number of counterparties that are domiciled outside my home country. So, for example, the software platform that we run is developed by a German company, and having learned first and foremost, the German mindset, at the MBA course, having interacted with classmates there, I think it really did stand me in good stead, to do business globally. We do have funders from different parts of the world as well. And again, just those soft skills that you actually develop by interacting with people from different parts of the world do equip you in ways you can't quantify as you actually leave the MBA. But in future years, you really get to understand how much you've actually benefited from being in a very diverse class.
Great, thank you so much. Conscious that we are running out of time, so I want to quickly just put one more question to each of you, if I can, before we finish up. So Niel, coming back to you, I'm sure that we'll have some people who are dialed in today who are considering coming to Oxford, maybe with a partner or with family as well. And I know that your wife came with you when you came to Oxford, and so wondered if you could just share some insights into your experience and speak a little about any support that was available for partners who joined on the MBA.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got I hope she can't hear me, but I got a bit of the best of both. She was there for a bit of for a part of the program, and then also still remain in South Africa for another part of it. But I think either way, there's such a strong support, whether it be from the college in terms of accommodation, or whether it be socially, how the university helps with integrating the partners into all the social events and then sort of into your calendar is really good. So yeah, I would definitely, as you also, I would definitely not let that be a barrier. I would encourage, you to make a plan that best suits you, knowing full well that both ways could, work very well. There's a lot of support from both university and college, and I mean people who had wives and partners up in Oxford full time really didn't struggle to get them part-time work here and there. So yeah, overall it was there was people that definitely handled it better than we did, and there's definitely quite a few lessons learned if we had to do it again. But yeah, that should definitely not be something that prevents you from considering a full-time MBA.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Coming back to you, Barati, I know you've touched already on how important the Africa focus was for you in choosing the Oxford MBA, and I know that you participated in the international elective when you were on programme with us. Could you say, in your opinion, why you feel that elective is so popular? Because it is one of the most popular elective options with MBA, the MBA class, and what do you feel is the benefit of that elective for African students in particular?
Yeah, so it's similar to the course that Clive mentioned in his year when they went to other emerging markets. So ours was doing business in Africa, and I think as someone from the continent, it's very easy to think that, well, I'm from there, there's nothing more that I have to learn, and it's probably maybe a rudimentary course for those from outside of the continent to learn more about the continent and get an excuse to go on safari. And it's actually anything but that. It was quite an intense business course centered around case studies, similar to what Clive was saying, and we had the benefit of having the executives from the companies that we were doing the case studies on come in and give us even more insight. And even for someone like myself, so I've lived in Southern Africa and I've also lived in East Africa. I was based in Kenya for about 2 years. And so even I can't say that I fully understand all the countries in Southern Africa, all the countries in East Africa. So I still learned quite a lot, and also then got exposure to West Africa and also North Africa that I had absolutely zero experience or exposure to. So it really is an incredible course, and we had the opportunity to also be taught by the current finance minister of Zim, Professor Mthuli Ncube. He was absolutely phenomenal, and he had at the time launched the Africa Investment Index, and it's an incredible index that would give you the opportunities and the ranking of the countries based on various metrics. And that was incredible for someone like me, especially interested in investment on the continent. But not only that, a lot of my classmates who hadn't even considered a career in Africa or anything like that got so much knowledge and experience from that that actually informed their decisions to give it a try post-MBA and be based somewhere on the continent. And I think probably just finally on that course is that it was amazing how coming out of that it led to so many other things. So a lot of the people that classmates that we were on the course with, they were how can I say, enthusiastic about the opportunity that when it came to the entrepreneurship project, we did an investment fund in Africa. Our group at the end, actually, we had myself from South Africa, we had someone from Portugal, we had someone from Japan, and it's all people that were on that course. So I think it's very popular because it's very practical. You've got industry leaders who come, and you've also got such thought leadership in terms of the lecturers who give it. I know that it's not Professor Mthuli Ncube anymore, but I know that the lecturer who's currently doing it now has a wealth of experience across the continent and has lectured at various Ivy League institutions as well. And so it's unparalleled in terms of the type of insight that you'd get from that course.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Nabilah, coming back to you, so I know that during your year on programme in Oxford, you were very well known for documenting your experience of Oxford outside of the classroom through your social media. And so wanted to ask you if you could just touch on what the highlights of that kind of Oxford experience were for you during your year programme.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a very active Instagram account for my year in Oxford. I think, you know, I sort of went into this entire experience telling myself that I was going to say yes more than I say no. And it was absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. So I think for me, one of the big things was the Oxford Union, which was absolutely immersive in terms of allowing you to experience world leaders, you know, debates, and really the entire world comes to Oxford, and usually the Oxford Union is where they would speak at. So I had the opportunity to listen to Bernie Sanders, the leader of the Navajo Nation. We had Sir John Cleese coming across, and also got the chance to chat to Praveen Gordhan, who came to Oxford over that period as well. So very, very interesting points of interaction there. I think there was also the sort of out of the classroom conversations that you would have. And you know, I always say this, but it's so true that you would sit down at lunch and it felt like you were having lunch with United Nations, because the class is so diverse. People have, you know, different experiences, different backgrounds. And for me, those conversations were what really added the richness to the entire Oxford experience. So whether you were hanging around in some sort of a park or punting down one of the rivers, you know, there was always a very enriching experience in that respect. And you know, I think, you know, even the social events that we had with the business school were huge. So I know Clive mentioned some of the celebrations. So we had a huge Diwali event in our year with a huge dance off. So it was a lot of fun. And I think everyone knows this about Oxford. I mean, there's the cliche of it looking like Hogwarts, and it's true. You know, you have the beautiful colleges, you have the beautiful libraries, and as a student of the business school, you have access to be able to go into these spaces, you know, through your association with your college, and you know, embrace dinners. And I think for me, I've had some of the most interesting discussions over these college dinners, where you'll be sitting across someone who's studying something completely different to you, you know, and you can have a very, very enthralling conversation about that. One that sort of sticks out for me was I was speaking to a DPhil student, a PhD DPhil student, who was doing his entire thesis on English literature, looking at two poets across a very short space of time in the 1940s, if I'm not mistaken. And fascinating, you know, to sort of engage on things that are completely different to what you might be interested in. So yeah, I think there's a whole list of things. I know we're running out of time, so I would highly recommend that, you know, whoever, you know, if you're going to be going on this MBA journey, don't just go there with the idea that it's a purely academic experience, because much of your learning will come from outside of the classroom, and that is what shapes the entire experience in terms of you know, being a well-rounded student in this environment.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for your responses there. I think you've probably made a lot of the people who are there very excited about the prospect of spending a year in Oxford, so thank you very much. We just have time for one final question, because we're almost past the end. So coming back to you, Clive, just for one last question. You obviously have had over 10 years working through your career after the MBA, and I wanted to ask you, just on reflection now, what skills do you feel that you developed while you were on the MBA that have helped you the most across the last plus years of your career?
Thank you for that. So certainly, I would say, you know, learned a lot really around networking, building relationships, which is obviously key as you know, grow an enterprise. And I think I learned a great deal of that at Oxford. Quite a lot of hard skills, obviously, that you learn, you know, within the MBA itself. You know, from a strategy point of view, being able to, you know, think at a very strategic level. And you know, my background coming into the MBA was, you know, finance, and I learned quite a lot from the non-finance disciplines, you know, on the MBA course. But some of the key things that I think I will take away, you know, reflecting back over the 10+ years, you know, that I've actually left Oxford, you know, first and foremost, you know, I made really good friends, you know, over the years. This has been very important, as I've actually developed, as a person, in my career as well. So, a lot of these people are very good, support network, that allow me to think through issues, and they're sounding boards in a lot of the major decisions that I make. As a result of being, incorporated into the greater Oxford community, I've really been able to, walk with that credibility as well. Someone who's actually, been to Oxford, who's passed through Oxford, and then is therefore, able to be looked at, by the wider world, in a different view. That's really allowed me to also make the step up in my career. So I sit on quite a number of corporate boards as well, and I think a big part of that is testament to to the credibility of the Oxford MBA. I would say lastly, one of the things that I would definitely take from from Oxford is the global mindset that comes with being on such a course, thinking through issues not at a very local level, but really just understanding how the local context obviously interacts with a lot of global trends taking place, and that's been really important for me as I've sought to build my my enterprise here back home in Zimbabwe.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. A nice note to finish up on, I think. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for sharing your insights and your experiences of your time in Oxford so eloquently. We're really, really grateful to you for giving up your time. And I hope that everybody who's dialed in today is feeling really encouraged and inspired to maybe look into the Oxford MBA a little bit more. As we mentioned earlier in the webinar, please do reach out to our team if you have any questions at all. We'll move on to our final slide, and that will include our email address. So for anybody who does want to reach out to our team, you can reach us on that, and we'd be really, really happy to hear from you. Hope that you all continue to stay safe as we all continue to slowly roll out of the world of lockdown, and we'll look forward to hopefully hearing from many of you in the future. Thank you all very much and have a lovely evening.